Dydh. That's hello in a language that was brought back from the brink of extinction at the beginning of the 20th century. At the southwesternmost tip of the UK, beyond these cliffs, there's nothing but thousands of miles of Atlantic Ocean until the shores of North America. This is Cornwall, home to over 500,000 people and once upon a time a totally independent kingdom, but now administered as a county of England. It's one of the Celtic nations, and has maintained a distinct identity and even its own language for centuries, despite losing its independence over 1,000 years ago. Many people here don't consider themselves to be English. They are, first and foremost, Cornish. This is one of Britain's most culturally underrepresented regions. And as a result, a lot of people in the rest of the UK don't realise that the Cornish are ethnically and culturally distinct from the English. So post-lockdown, I took an 8-hour train to Truro, Cornwall's capital, to find out why this particular part of Great Britain is so unique.
I've forgotten how to do this. It's been so long since I've been anywhere.
The Celtic nations have very different historical roots to England. Without going into tons of detail, they're pockets where the Celtic tribes that once dominated much of Europe continued to thrive, despite foreign conquests of the British Isles. That meant that in those regions, Celtic culture didn't change in the same way that English culture did, with the new arrivals, and persisted until today, in what is now Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and Brittany in northwestern France. But that raises a question. What actually defines Cornish identity? While I was there, I spoke with some locals, socially distanced of course, in person and on Zoom. About this all too often ignored culture.
Mebyon Kernow is in the Cornish language, and it means sons and daughters of Cornwall. It's why you'll see the words Kernow used a lot in Cornwall, because it's a reclaiming of the Cornish word for Cornwall. I've always been proud to be Cornish, but I would say that the symbols and the expression of that identity is actually greater now. Really? I think that people probably 40, 50, 60 years ago felt that it kind of went without saying. For me, diversity, it's not about ignoring our distinct identities, it's about celebrating those distinct identities. And Cornwall is an incredibly historic but incredibly important part of the wonderful mix that makes up that diversity.
There's a very strong connection with the landscape and almost a feeling of belonging to it, and a bit belonging to you in Cornwall, and not necessarily you as an individual, but you as a group. In each and every one of us, you know, certainly in me, we identify strongly with it. And it's not only my generation, but my predecessors did as well. And I know that because they told me, you know. They told me they felt as though it was something alive, almost. My grandfather certainly did. He felt it was a living thing.
Well, I think things like the melancholy, that's special, isn't it? It's a face that people see of the Cornish that they mistake as being grumpy, but it's something that's brought on by where you live and how hard it can be at times, or how you deal with the situation. It's a calmness about people that's very often mistaken.
As you will see, Kieran, we are a very passionate people. You are the worst of enemies and the best of friends. We will fight you to the bitter end. But win or lose, we will then take you for a pint.
You know, the Cornish have always been quite clannish and stuck together. Their motto is one and all, which means we like people to be individual, but we also stick together.
And I think the geography of Cornwall being that we're quite isolated, you don't cross borders very often. You know, it's very much more condensed.
You know when you cross the Tamar, and it's an emotional thing when you cross that river and come home, yeah.
Every group of people has different waves of identity. You know, the identity of Cornwall before the Industrial Revolution would be very different, would be around fishing, farming. With the Industrial Revolution, it's very much based around mining and Methodism.
That legacy of mining is scattered across the Cornish countryside. Abandoned mines dot the coastline, and Cornwall's mining landscape is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But that's just it. It's heritage. There are no functioning mines left here, which means that a working tradition, once an integral part of Cornwall's identity, passed down through generations, has disappeared.
I guess we're in a new phase now, because there is deindustrialisation. We're in the 21st century, so Cornwall's identity will be different today from how it was 200 years ago. And to me, again, optimistically, that's an exciting challenge. I'm not saying we should recreate Cornwall, I'm saying we should express the Cornwall that exists now.
There are some aspects of Cornish identity that are easier to define. Though it was once down to just 4 or 5 speakers, Cornwall has its own language. UNESCO only changed the classification of Cornish from extinct to critically endangered in 2009. But nowadays, there are around 400 to 500 people who can speak it fluently. And that's all because of a very impressive revival effort that's taken place over the last 100 years or so.
We are now recovering our language, and as we recover our language, a lot of people actually learn about Cornish history through their language lessons as well. And then you learn about what place names mean, and then you understand and get a better relationship with your landscape.
I, as a child, wouldn't have even known that the Cornish language existed. You know, it wasn't something that you ever saw. I mean, the visibility of the language has become so much more over the, probably the last 10 years even.
The Cornish people have bootstrapped their language from pretty much almost it being deceased. As a community, we're probably all quite proud of where we've got to, but I think we're also realistic that it's quite difficult to make it snowball very fast. It would help the community prosper, I think. Having a bit more pride enables people to build upon what they've actually got.
But while Cornwall is starting to rediscover its language and heritage, things haven't always been smooth sailing in this Celtic nation. And it's hard to deny that the Cornish are a marginalised community. More on that though in part 2. Until then, da Weles. See ya.